It's a joy to be here today and continue our series Beyond Sunday, where we look at how God moves in the areas of life where perhaps we least expect him to move, within our wounds, in our challenges, and as we're going to talk about today, in our culture. My name's Jonny. I'm one of the student pastors here, and along with Rima, I help head up the 6 p.m. And so if we haven't met, it would be great to get to know you and go for coffee with either of us. We have one rule, which is the coffee's always on us, but we'd love to find out a little bit more of your story. And I have a confession in speaking about culture tonight, because in spite of being the student pastor at the church, I do feel like I'm increasingly getting out of touch with culture. It was just I'm 30 now, and which doesn't seem too old, but I was opposite a receptionist who was about 19 as I was filling in an online form, and as I was filling in my email, she looked at me quite sympathetically and said, "Can I help you with that?" And I kind of wanted to be angry at her, because that's the kind of thing that I say to my mum, but she was quite forgiving. But I want to talk today about culture, and not just how God moves in culture, but how we respond and how we follow God in a culture that doesn't always look that much like him. Culture can be quite confusing and difficult to navigate, and so I want to start in a story that is a bit confusing and a little bit difficult to navigate, in a part of God's story with human beings where things aren't going all that well. And so I want to read from Jeremiah chapter 29, a letter that's written to some exiles, and it goes like this from verse 4. "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come and find you and fulfill my good promises to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and the places I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile." We join a time in God's story where things aren't going all that well. The people of whom God had called into himself had bought into all the wrong things. They'd bought into the lies which had put the elite at the top at the expense of the most vulnerable. Instead of treating life with the honor that it deserved, being made into the image of God and bestowing that honor, it had become something far more disposable. And leaders had become unwise and unfit, lacking integrity and honor and care for the people. Things were in a little bit of a mess. And so God, in bringing his people out of the land where they were supposed to buy into the story of God, buying into his kingdom that he wanted to establish here on earth, bringing beauty to pain, he exiled them into other lands from other surrounding nations. And here we find a prophet, a messenger, writing a letter to them. At this time, God would raise up prophets, messengers, teachers, really to expose the pain of their past, reveal to them the influence they had in their present, whilst also reminding them of a hope that they could find in their future. And I wonder for us, in the culture in which we currently find ourselves, that could kind of be a little bit helpful for us too, where values seem to be up for contention. Where leadership seems a little bit confused, where our desires perhaps lead to things that aren't all that desirable, where we have generations that are marked by their anxiety levels, and where we seem to be at a loss for our certain aim or direction in life. I don't feel like you have to look that far to realize that we're quite far off from where things should be. 1 in 3 adults saying they suffer with some level of anxiety. 1 in 4 saying that they struggle with loneliness. 1 in 5 saying they feel unfairly treated by society. In the last 5 years, statistically, people are less happy in their relationships. 70% of 20 to 34-year-olds saying they would consider to emigrate elsewhere. Kind of feels like the grass might be greener somewhere else. Dr. Jan Emmanuel Deneve, a professor here in Oxford, in response to a happiness survey, suggested that young people are going through something of a midlife crisis. Things aren't necessarily how they should be in our culture. Whether it's an injustice you face at work, a pain you experience in a certain relationship, a frustration you have with authority, or a void within the heart that something promised it would fill, and yet it's really just come up to be a lie. A question really arises. Where is God in our culture? And what does it look like to follow him when culture really doesn't look much like him? One of the extraordinary things that I get to see within some of the younger generations is the way in which they're seeking for answers in a way that other generations before them haven't really seemed to do. Just in the last year, the BBC, The Guardian, and The Times have all reported on studies that have suggested that they are looking for things in ways that perhaps others haven't really looked. The way in which they're viewing marriage is far more conservative than it used to than other previous generations, treating it in a much higher honor than it previously was held. They're drinking less than other generations, and they're self-curfewing social media because they recognize the addictive habits that it can hold often isn't all that healthy. There seems to be this recognition that for all the darkness that we can see out there, maybe the answers aren't necessarily all out there as much as they can be found with the darkness that's far closer to home. And as Jeremiah writes to this group of exiles that finds itself in a foreign land where there really isn't much God in it at all, Jeremiah writes to them as to how they are to behave. And the answers that he gives to them perhaps aren't exactly what we would expect. Instead of somehow this kind of like top-down view of cultural transformation, where there's a focus on economy or policy or education or revolution, Jeremiah starts with a space that's far closer to home, in a space that I think offers a space for a revolution of the heart. This is what he says in verse 4. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses, settle down, plant gardens, and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number. Do not decrease. Live your life. Get on with it. Build your houses. Plant gardens. Kind of a little bit anticlimactic, you might think. But there's something about that. There's something about the routine that Jeremiah is suggesting that we can find some life in. Increase in number. The word increase, multiply, rabah. It's the same word that we find God speaking to Adam and Eve in Eden. After this perfect creation, he says, now go forth, do stuff, multiply, build something, create something out of the elements that I instilled on earth here for you. Amongst all of the difficulty that we might face, amongst all the uncertainty that we find across every turn, there seems to be a direction, a pathway that doesn't deviate, that Jesus invites us to walk. Something that we can find on our own front door. Something that's far closer to us than we might realize. When I grew up in church, I used to hear speakers, both in church and in Christian festivals, really amazing speakers that used to preach amazing messages of world transformation, how to be culture shakers, how to change the world. And they were incredible, beautiful messages. But I sometimes kind of feel that there's a world on our doorstep that we're also invited to go and meet. What if you were sent for exactly the place that you currently find yourself in? What if where you were wasn't an accident? What if where you were at the moment wasn't some kind of like secondary thing that you should be getting on with before the main thing arrives? Go, build houses. Plant gardens. Do the things you're supposed to do on your own front doorstep. Maybe there's something of a revolution of the heart that Jesus wants to start to try and transform within the culture that we currently find ourselves in. There's a student who I met with not so long ago. We walked around Christchurch together, and there was something of what he said that I thought was really interesting, and something that I think probably a lot of us feel. He's an engineering student, amazing guy, and he said, I really enjoy what I'm doing, but sometimes I kind of struggle to see how it fits into the kingdom of God. Sometimes struggle to see how it kind of really fits into what God wants of me, and whether there's something bigger that he wants me to do. And I found that a little bit interesting, so I kind of pressed further. I asked about his degree and his family and his friends and what he enjoyed doing. And there was this project that he was doing as part of his degree. I said, tell me about your project. He said, well, there's a few of us and we're getting together and we're creating a new piece of technology that would allow us to identify epilepsy in rural communities which would otherwise not manage to identify it so that they can access the care they need cheaper, easier, and quicker. I said, oh, in the kingdom of heaven, do you think there's going to be more epilepsy or less epilepsy? And he said, less epilepsy. I said, good answer. And when Jesus came down to earth, and when he started to identify sick people and rest hands on them and bring healing and restoration to the world, was that him bringing his kingdom to the world, or was it some kind of cosmic side gig? And he went, I think it was bringing kingdom of heaven to earth. I said, absolutely right. I wouldn't know where to start in building technology to identify epilepsy. Would have no idea. I don't know how a battery works. No idea. And yet God's positioned you in a time such as this to bring about some restoration in the world that others would only dream of. Dallas Willard says it like this, the American philosopher and theologian. He says, holy people must stop going into church work as their natural course of action and take up holy orders in farming, law, education, banking, and journalism. And if I can add, engineering and coffee. With the same zeal previously given to evangelism or to pastoral and missionary work. You want to know how to change a culture, Jeremiah says. Start on your own front doorstep. Look out at where you are. Build houses, plant gardens, raise families. If you're a parent, be entrusted over the family that God has given you. One of the most extraordinary things you do might not be something you do, but someone you raise. Bring peace and joy and love and kindness in areas that are unfamiliar with such powers, in classrooms and boardrooms and lecture rooms and operating theaters and coffee shops. And rehabs. Come on. There's something that God has called you into. Dig in and bless, Jeremiah says. What if you were called to be sent to exactly the place that you currently find yourself in? What does Jeremiah say to do? Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it. Because if it prospers, you too will prosper. I think there is something extraordinary in the way that God invites us to engage with the culture that we currently find ourselves in. Absolutely extraordinary. But I think there are also two temptations in which we can find ourselves when it comes to our faith in our culture. One of those temptations is that we see faith as something insular. The other temptation is that we see faith as something that's extra. What does it look like when faith is insular? When we put brick walls around ourselves to hide from the darkness outside so that we can live in our own faith microcosm that kind of feels nice, fluffy, and safe. We live in the Christian bubble all alone. Anything that doesn't seem to fit in the walls of the church, we kind of try to want to push out as far as we possibly can away from. And there's something noble about that. And there's something actually quite beautiful around what some of that can look like. And I genuinely believe that it's in that secret place where everything within our lives can be improved upon when we seek the love of our Father in heaven when nobody else is watching. But the fruits that are developed in that place were never supposed to stay there. They were never supposed to stay in that place. Back in September, I got married just here to Chloe. And it's one of the things that I learned about getting married is there's a whole bunch of things that you need to prepare for that no one really tells you about before you ask someone to marry you. And one of those things, Chloe came to me one day and said, oh, I want to go and find my wedding scent. I didn't know what that was either. But she said, I'm going out with my mum to decide on what perfume I'm going to wear at our wedding. And I said, that's amazing. Have a great time. Stay to budget. And she went out, and she went and she found this lovely bottle of perfume from Jo Malone. It's English pear and sweet pea. If you like the smell of my wife, you can buy the same. And she went to Jo Malone, and she particularly liked this perfume, and came back, was very excited, and she wore this perfume. And it's quite a small bottle, so after a few months, it ran out, and it was around Christmas time, and my parents very generously said, is there anything that Chloe would like for Christmas? And I said, interesting, you should ask. She's just run out of this bottle of perfume from Jo Malone. And I didn't realize that that was going to cause so much confusion, but my dad went to a department store and I think had a bit of an argument with a retail assistant because he was insistent that there was a perfume called Home Alone, which when you think about it, it's the worst possible name for a perfume you could ever think of. Home Alone. Tuesday night, TV dinner, everyone's out, hair up, bit of Home Alone. And as ridiculous as that would be, I kind of think we can sometimes struggle with our faith in the same way. For all the joy and the goodness and the beauty that God can bestow on us, it's easy to wear it at home and let no one else get a whiff of the smell. It was never supposed to stay at home. Jeremiah says, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city. That word peace, it's not a passive word. We often see peace as something that's absent of all the nasty stuff. Peace is proactive. It's something that goes out into the world. It restores, it redeems, it brings goodness and beauty where there is none. It picks up broken parts and puts them back together. Bring peace and prosperity to the world. Jeremiah was saying to the people, listen, you're not supposed to be other earthly, you're not supposed to be whimsical, but to recognize that to be heavenly minded is to be of earthly good. Faith isn't supposed to be insular. It's not supposed to be shut away. But it's not supposed to be something extra either. What does it look like when faith is something extra? Well, maybe your life doesn't look all that different from those around you. Maybe for you, faith is something extra. When you find yourself in the office and you find yourself looking over one shoulder and then the other to make sure no one's looking before you do the thing you're about to do. And you think, well, that's fine because everyone does it. When you find yourself on the start of a night out and you think, I'm probably more in control now than I will be at the end of the night. Well, that's fine because everyone deserves a bit of fun. Maybe it's that time where the doors are closed and the windows are shut and there's that thing that sort of grasps after your heart that you know isn't particularly great for you. And you think, well, kind of everyone has their thing. Sure, everyone does it. And perhaps your life doesn't really look that different from those around you. Maybe you've done a really good job at building up a world which God kind of fits in neatly into at your own convenience, where your very image of God is someone who kind of looks a little bit like you, but just kind of a little bit further on, who doesn't require anything of you. Voltaire said it like this, the French philosopher. He said, in the beginning, God created human beings in his image, and ever since we've been returning the favor. Faith wasn't supposed to be insular. It's not supposed to be extra either. Me and my friend Dave, we were playing golf last week, and I don't play golf very often at all. Dave plays a little bit more than me, but isn't amazing either, and I hope he's okay with me saying that. As we were playing golf, he was telling me that his son, Riley, had bought him for Father's Day a personalized gift of 3 golf balls that said, best dad ever. And he received these golf balls from his son, Riley, my godson. And he said, Riley, this is amazing. Thank you so much. These are so precious. I'm never going to lose them. I'm going to keep them safe in my bag forever. And Riley's face dropped. And he was like, Dad, you have to use them. They weren't supposed to stay in the bag. The gifts that God has bestowed upon you, his presence that rests within you, the mission that he calls you onto, it's never supposed to stay in the bag. It's not supposed to be treated recklessly, but it's supposed to be out there active. So what Dave does now is he takes the golf balls and he plays a tee shot with one of the old ones where it might get lost. And when he gets to the green, where it's only kind of the little tapping shots, he replaces the ball so it can be used. Ironically, I think that those outside of the church, they kind of get frustrated when we fall into either of these temptations of faith. On one level, they see people who lock themselves behind closed doors, and they kind of think they're kind of those self-righteous lot out there that I could never really be like. And on the other side, they kind of see others where they think, well, my life doesn't really look much different from them at all. I think people in this culture are searching for some direction. And we can be people when we seek after Jesus, when we seek to build his kingdom, we can be people who give some of that direction. What is it that Jeremiah says to do instead? If we're not insular, if we're not extra, he says this, then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. What does it look like to seek God with all of your heart? It's not hiding away. It's not falling into anything and everything that the world offers. It's not seeing your call and your arena as some secondary calling, and you put other callings up on pedestals. But when you recognize Jesus as the author and the perfecter of your faith, when you see him in his glorious beauty and accept his invitation for bringing his kingdom down on earth. We don't need to be beholden to culture, but we can bring and create within it the kingdom that he always wanted to establish. I love how Jesus was the ultimate transformer of culture. I love that he challenged leadership models where he bent down on his knees and washed the disciples' feet and said, the first will be last and the last will be first. I love that he challenged the ethical divides within his communities, healing the sick of centurions, raising the heads of female Samaritans, commissioning outcast pagans. I love how he uplifts and exalts women, showing himself to them first after the resurrection and beholding the good news to them before anybody else. I love how he raises children up into the highest of honor. Be like these children if you want to get into the kingdom of heaven. My friend Andy was adopting a while ago, and he said they asked them lots of questions when you adopt a child, and one of them was about his faith and how that was going to affect what his parenting was going to look like. He said it was the easiest answer to a question he could ever give, because he said, because of my worldview and what Jesus teaches me, there is no other worldview on the planet which holds children in higher esteem. He says, it's Jesus. I love how Jesus looks after the outcast, lays hands on lepers, and gives to the poor. I love how he brings in a vast array of different people as to be his disciples, tax collectors and zealots, Galileans and Judeans. I love how he challenges the political atmosphere when he holds a coin up and says, give physically to to the physical powers, but give your heart to the one who dwells in heaven. I love that when he teaches his people to pray, he doesn't teach them to try and escape earth into heaven, but to bring heaven down onto earth. I love that he spends his life with the religious and educated elite, giving them lessons that would cause their jaws to drop onto the floor, and yet he would die next to criminals, leaving their souls restored. I love that when he teaches his lessons, that when you grasp hold of this grace that is bringing restoration into a broken world, you become like a city on a hill that other people go to and seek nourishment from. And when Jesus was walking around towards this area called Caesarea Philippi, a place where no religious Jew would ever step foot because of the utter darkness that took place there, where there was sexual debauchery of every kind that you could and wouldn't want to imagine, where there was child sacrifice at the entrance of a cave dedicated to the Greek god of fright, Pan. That's where we get the word panic. He turns to his followers, many of whom would have been perhaps 16, 17, 18-year-old boys who were perhaps quaking, thinking, if my mum saw me here, she would go nuts. And Jesus says, you see all of this? Who do you say I am? And Peter stands forward and he says, I believe you're the Messiah. You're the Son of God. And he says, on that truth, I will build my church. When you recognize who I am, when you stand on that truth, when you buy into my kingdom, when you follow me closely, when you seek me with all of your heart, your soul, and your mind, things cannot stay the same. The gates of hell shake at the prospect of it. They cannot stand against it. When you invite the Holy Spirit to consume your life, when you seek him with all of your heart, your soul, and your mind, you don't need to be scared of the darkness. The darkness is scared of you. When Jesus came to earth, in his very being, he showed his mission. His very incarnation was God's yes to the world, bringing light to it, bringing joy to it. And he invites you to build his kingdom in the culture in which you reside. What does it look like to seek God? It's not trying to impress him. It's not trying to do things to earn points for him or get him to like you. It's a devotion to him because of a need for him. And as a result, it's exploring a mission commissioned by him. N.T. Wright says this about the resurrection. The resurrection doesn't mean escaping from the world. It means mission to the world, based on Jesus' lordship over the world. What would it look like if on your doorstep you weren't there by accident? Just imagine it now. When you pick up that phone call, you have that one-to-one, when you're wiping down that table, when you're checking in with that patient. What if you were sent for a moment such as that? What would it look like to bring some of God's kingdom into where you are at the moment? In the long and the boring, in the routine, in the building of houses and the planting of gardens. What would it look like for you to bring peace and prosperity to that city? To pray for it, to contend for it? My wife's a midwife, and I think midwives are extraordinary in what they do, not just the medical knowledge that they need to have and the care for women and parents as they start the adventure of parenthood, and just the vast amount of different things that they have to do, but also the extraordinary weight of pastoral care that they need to help people through, both in the most joyful times of their life, but also perhaps the most difficult and disastrous and dark. And one of the things that has really captivated me within the world of medicine has been a group of midwives and doctors and nurses, Christians, who gather together outside the walls of the hospital in homes to contend for those inside, to pray for them regularly. I think that's incredible. I think it's incredible for two reasons. First of all, sometimes they come around our house and they bring cake. But mainly because it makes me think, how many of those prayers get answered without anybody realizing? How many lives exist today? How many complications were avoided? How much peace was instilled in the darkest of situations? How many times was someone in the right place at the right time? How much of a staff culture was built just through the faithful praying, contending from those outside the walls? What would it look like for you to contend for your workplace, to contend for your family, to contend for your community? What if you were sent for such a time as this? What would it look like for you to build where you are, to bless it, to pray for it, and to seek God with all of your heart?